Would you rather have your eyebrows on fleek or have a killer bod? Well, back in medieval times, you didn't have to choose because you could rock both at the same time. Hi, it's me, and welcome to another round of boring history. Today we're talking about beauty standards from the Middle Ages. If you like this kind of content, or if you just like us talking about stuff for 7 minutes so that you can fall asleep to our soothing voices, then make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And with all that said, let's get started. So first off, let's talk about hair. During the Middle Ages, people liked their hair big and beautiful. They believed that the size and volume of one's hair showed how healthy they were and how much wealth they had. The bigger the hair, the better. Women would use whatever products they could get their hands on to add more volume to their hair. This included things like beeswax, rose water, and even urine. Urine was actually a popular ingredient in many beauty products during the Middle Ages because it was believed to have cleansing and anti-inflammatory properties. So not only did women use it to make their hair look bigger, but they also used it to wash their face and even whiten their teeth. So if you ever in the unfortunate situation where you need to use urine as a beauty product, make sure to use it wisely. Maybe try putting it in your hair first. Okay, now let's move on to makeup. During the Middle Ages, women would often use makeup to cover up any imperfections in their skin. So they would use things like white lead and mercury to get a flawless complexion. However, these products were not only harmful, but also very toxic. White lead, for example, is still used today in some products, but only in small amounts, because it can cause serious health problems if too much is applied. During the Middle Ages, women would often apply white lead directly to their face without any sort of protection, which could result in lead poisoning. Mercury, on the other hand, is a powerful poison that can cause serious damage to the brain and the kidneys. Despite these risks, women continued to use these products because they believed that they were doing their skin good. They also used makeup to accentuate their eyes and lips. They would use eyeshadow made from ingredients like lead and copper, and they would use lip balm made from beeswax and rosewater. Now, let's take a closer look at clothing. Clothing was a major indicator of wealth and status during the Middle Ages. The richer you were, the more elaborate and expensive your clothes could be. Women typically wore long, flowing dresses that were made from expensive fabrics like velvet and silk. These dresses were often decorated with gold or silver thread, and they could take months to make. Men, on the other hand, wore tunics and hose. Tunics were long, loose-fitting shirts that were often made from linen or wool, while hose were tight-fitting pants that were usually made from leather. The upper class often wore clothing made from more expensive materials like velvet and silk, while the lower class wore more practical clothing made from linen and wool. Clothing was also a way for people to show off their wealth and power. The colors that people wore were often reserved for the royal family or the nobility. For example, in England, the king's color was red and the queen's color was blue. If you weren't royalty, then you weren't allowed to wear those colors. That would be considered a serious fashion faux pas. Alright, so now let's move on to jewelry. During the Middle Ages, jewelry was a sign of wealth and power. Only the rich could afford to wear expensive metals like gold and silver. They would wear jewelry made from these materials to show off their wealth. But there was also a lot of symbolism behind the jewelry that they wore. For example, rings were often given as a symbol of power or authority. The most famous example of this is the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings. In real life, rings were often given to knights before they went into battle. It was a way of giving them power and authority over the enemy. Jewelry was also worn for religious reasons. People would wear crosses or other religious symbols to show their faith. This was especially popular during the Crusades, when European Christians seized Jerusalem and established several states along the Mediterranean coast. European Christians began wearing jewelry with Arabic designs as a reminder of their conquest. Alright, so let's move on to something a little bit more interesting. Let's talk about perfume. During the Middle Ages, people didn't have access to modern-day deodorant, so they would use perfume to cover up any unpleasant smells. Perfume was also a way of showing off one's wealth, because it was expensive, and not everyone could afford it. Back then, they didn't have perfumes like we have today. Instead, they would wear things like pouches filled with herbs and flowers. These would be tied around their waist or hung from their belt loop, so that the scent would follow them around all day long. Sometimes they would even carry these around with them so that they could smell them whenever they wanted to. I'm not sure if that's better or worse than having body odor. You decide. Now, let's move on to something a little bit more gross. Let's talk about hair removal. During the Middle Ages, people believed that the more hair you had on your body, the uglier you were. This was especially true for women. They believed that having lots of body hair made them look hairy, wild, and uncivilized. So what did they do about it? Well, they removed it, of course. There were several methods that they used to remove hair during the Middle Ages. One of the most popular ones was sugaring. Sugaring is a form of hair removal that uses a paste made from sugar and lemon juice to remove unwanted hair. It may sound disgusting, but it was actually a lot more sanitary than the other methods that were available at the time. Another popular method was tweezing. As you can imagine, this involved plucking the hair out by the roots with tweezers. The best part about this method is that it was relatively painless, but it was very time-consuming. No wonder they called it tweezing instead of waxing. Imagine sitting there for hours on end tweezing your eyebrows. It's no wonder that people would rather use other methods that were a little bit more painful. And finally, let's talk about tattoos. During the Middle Ages, tattoos were seen as a sign of danger and evil. They were often associated with criminals and heretics, so most people tried to avoid them at all costs. However, there were a few people who did get tattoos, usually as a form of punishment. For example, criminals who were branded with hot irons would often get the mark of their crime tattooed onto their body. Heretics, on the other hand, were often tattooed with religious symbols as a form of punishment. Tattoos were also common among sailors, as they believed that it would protect them from evil spirits. The most common tattoo that they would get was a large red cross. So if you ever see a sailor with a large red cross tattooed on his body, you'll know that he's probably been through some rough seas. Okay, so that's it. Those are some of the beauty standards from the Middle Ages. What do you think? Did you ever wear a dress made from human skin? Comment down below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.